Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey, founders, and thanks for listening to another episode of Category Visionaries. Today, we're speaking with Neil, CEO and co-founder of Calypso AI, an AI security platform that's raised over $38 million in funding. Neil, thanks for chatting with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brett. Really looking forward to it.
Not a problem. I'm excited as well. Let's go ahead and just kick off the quick summary of who you are and a bit more about your background.
Yeah, happy to do that. So I have a bit of unconventional background. I started taking classes in university at UCLA when I was 13, got my first internship in tech when I was 14, spent a bit of time kind of quasi working in VC when I was 15, 16, and then got really interested in kind of the government and really this question of like, what makes America great? And I had the opportunity to go work in the US intelligence community. And so I go through this like long process to get what's called like top secret, special compartmentalized information security clearance. And I get the opportunity to, I guess, peek behind the proverbial curtain, as you say, and the opportunity to spend some time NGA. And I'm like astonished. One, just how much really interesting data there is. Two, the fact that it's pretty much impossible to analyze all of that data without AI. And three, the fact that if 1 and 2 are true, that means that there are going to be folks that are going to try to probe the vulnerabilities inherent to using AI for that data. And there is this need for AI security solutions. And there's nothing that really exists in the market or out there, which really serves as kind of the inspiration for the company and for everything that we're doing here today.
Now your LinkedIn makes more sense. As I was preparing for this interview, I'm like, all right, looks like he went straight from college to founding this company. So either he's really young or like some of the other guests, he worked in intelligence and can't list or talk about anything that he's done. So it sounds like it's the intelligence option.
Actually, both are true.
Both are true. How old are you?
So I'm 25 now, and I started the company, I guess, formally speaking, when I was 20, and we kind of got going when I was 19 in terms of thinking of the idea and going through the process for the company.
Wow. What were the early days of the company like then? Take us back to the first, maybe like 90 days.
Well, a complete shit show, if we're putting it really simply. It was really like the process of iterative learning. There really was nothing in the AI security space. It wasn't a term. It wasn't a space that existed. It wasn't a space that anyone really knew anything about. It came out of this research paper that Ian Goodfellow had put together. And it was the same research paper, like was the underlying paper for generative adversarial networks or GANs or like deepfakes. And it really showed that there were vulnerabilities that were inherent to machine learning. And so that was in 2013. There was all of this like kind of interesting academic research. And then we're in like 2019 with this company. We're getting going. We're trying to understand what the biggest vulnerabilities for AI models are. And so we start asking ourselves the question of how do we do that? And so the first principles answer was obviously, wait, why don't we just try breaking some AI systems, obviously in a contained way? And we effectively make a list of what the biggest vulnerabilities are and what those attack surfaces look like. And so the first 90 days for us really was that. It was this incremental process of iteration and this incremental process of like finding and understanding vulnerabilities from computer vision to code to a bunch of other data types.
So it sounds somewhat obvious that you would need a platform like yours today, given everything that's happened in this kind of post-ChatGPT world. What was it like back in the early days, 2019, when you were talking about this? Did people get it right away?
No, not in the slightest. We were effectively telling people that you should solve a problem before the problem exists and before you know about it. So folks understood it and became early customers of ours on the defense and the national security side of the house. But outside of that, there really wasn't this understanding of A, what the vulnerabilities of AI meant, and B, what you should do about it, and C, just how easy it was to like hack or break an AI system. And so a lot of what we did in those days was just talking to folks about like where they were in their AI journey, what the vulnerabilities inherent to what they were doing were, and like just how easily it would be for a malicious hacker to mess with their system, and how malicious hacker didn't even need to have AI knowledge to mess with their AI system.
Was the government your first paying customer?
It was.
What are the pros and then what are the cons of having the government as an early customer?
Yeah, great question. Pros, you're able to get fairly significant amounts of revenue at a really, really fast clip, and you're able to work collaboratively with them on the R&D side of the house. The cons are the type of solutions they need when you're going through an R&D path with them are really different than what you're going to sell from an enterprise perspective on a longer term basis, in terms of like how they think about problems, in terms of what problems they think are important compared to like your enterprise buyers. And ultimately, kind of that need to be able to balance both the needs on the gov side of the house and on the enterprise side of the house.
Something a lot of founders struggle with is trust and credibility. And some of the other founders I've talked to who have companies that are also selling to the government, they say that's the ultimate kind of stamp of approval. And if you can sell to the government, have them be a paying customer, when you go and try to sell it to other large enterprise organizations, that's like the ultimate validation. Is that something that you saw as well?
I think there is some definite truth to that, especially when you're talking about cybersecurity focused products. I think it's just really important to kind of know and understand how to best drive credibility and where credibility comes from. In my experience, enterprises are so inundated with like startups that the best way to demonstrate credibility clearly is literally by showing them rather than telling them as quickly and as soon as you can, rather than going on this long diatribe about your kind of primitives or prerequisites, getting it into their hands and letting them actually prove out to themselves that the claims that you're making, the value proposition that you offer is like 100% true.
What's that look like then in terms of your platform? Is it a PLG approach and they're able to get their hands dirty right away, or what does that look like?
Yeah. So right now that is like really, really easy to get to initial demo and then an initial like pilot. We do have something coming on the horizon, either like right after this episode is released or right before this episode is released, where we're going to make it completely frictionless to use the product, play with the product, try it, and start gaining value from it.
What else have you done to build trust and credibility in the market?
So a couple of things. One, if you actually look at the standards in the space, so the like NIST AI risk management framework, we've actually been contributing to it since initially existed. When you look at the MITRE standards in the space, we've been contributing to them since before the standards actually existed. When you look at the EU regulation in the space, we've been talking to the EU regulators since before there was any regulation. And the same goes for the UK as well. So that's one piece of it. And one of the benefits of having kind of history in the space. The second thing that we do is we're very careful in terms of the data that we store, the data that we don't store, how we talk about customers, how we don't talk about customers, how we talk about use cases. And then the third and kind of most important component for us is just getting out there and kind of helping educate the market on beyond the product that you're selling. What are the threats out there? How do the threats manifest themselves? And really kind of being that informed advisor to as many enterprises as possible, even before they make the buy decision.
I see you have a lot of incredible media coverage. What's the impact of media been for you? And how do you think about measuring that impact?
Great question. I wish we had a way to measure it. We really don't have a way of measuring the impact of media coverage. We ultimately think of it as just one part of being a trusted advisor, in the same way that who your investors are, who your customers are, the media coverage that you've gotten, the content and publications that you put out there, and the ability for folks to try your product and your solution kind of all get to this question of credibility and how we decide who is credible and who isn't credible. And we think of media as a component part of that.
How have you gone about building a marketing org?
Super good question. Still a work in progress for us. And I really think that we've done better on the brand building side of building a marketing org than we have on the kind of pure play demand gen side of building a marketing org. We've been really lucky to have had a lot of folks want to organically engage and organically work with us. And one of the challenges that we're confronting today and confronting head on and solving is making sure that we're building an organization that can both excel at brand building and the work involved in category creation, as well as the work that's actually involved in building a really, really solid digital demand gen function.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode. What's the brand mean to you? Or I should say, what do you want the brand to mean to your customers? When they hear the name, what do you want them to think?
So we want them to think AI securely. Those two words are so key to us. We are AI enablement and security brand, and we want customers to associate us with making their lives easier and also contributing to the security that they need to actually deploy transformer architectures into production.
Something other AI founders have told me is that pre-ChatGPT, they had very, very different marketing, messaging, and positioning than they have post-ChatGPT. And they went from this world where they went from their creating demand to fighting to try to capture demand. Have you seen a similar shift? Did you have to completely change the messaging and the positioning, or has that been steady this entire time?
So we've changed everything in the company. The era of building bespoke machine learning models is over. Going from using a library like PyTorch or TensorFlow or Keras and building your own model is over. We are now in the era of using transformer architectures and foundation models that leverage transformer architectures as the base layer of everything that we're doing, and using RAG architectures or using fine-tuned models or just plain and simple prompt for anything and everything that you do. So yes, we've changed our messaging. We've never changed our focus in AI security, but we've changed what the focus of our protection is and how we think about the attack surface. And the messaging has obviously been a part of that.
How do you think about your market category? Is it AI security, or what's the Gartner term for this? What do they call this category? And do you want to be in that category, or do you want to create a new one?
Yeah, super good question. So there is no clear term for this space yet. AI security is one of the words that's banded around. AI trust, risk, and safety, TRSM, is the term that Gartner likes to use. Guardrails is another word that folks like to use. We really think of it as AI security and as the category that we're in, or securely enabling generative AI.
Tell us about the Gartner Cool Vendor 2022 that you were part of. What impact did that have on your go-to-market so far?
Yeah, super good question. I think just like everything else, from the media side of the house to contributing to the standards in the space, that's just another example of how we're innovating in the AI space, and how a huge part of what we do is not just listening to customers, but it's actually asking ourselves the question from a first principles perspective. What's fundamentally happening from an underlying Gen AI perspective? How does that intersect with risks? And how can we help solve those risks? And how can we do so in a way that massively simplifies deployment? So that's a really long-winded way of not directly answering your question and just saying it's a component part of everything. But just like any business, one of these components on their own is meaningless. It all fits together, or at least it should, in a startup that is well orchestrated.
What type of growth are you seeing in the market today? I know you're obviously a private company, so you don't have to share anything you're not comfortable with, but are there any numbers or any data that you can share just to tease our audience?
Yeah, what I'll say is that we've had more growth in the last 6 months than we've had cumulatively put together as a business to date.
What do you attribute to that? What do you think you got right? Obviously, the market's hot, but I'm sure there's much, much more than that.
I think it's really like a set of bets that we made. So the set of bets that we've made, bet number one, the future of Gen AI doesn't belong to one company. The future belongs to many, many different players, whether these are open source models that you are leveraging, like Mistral or like Llama 2, whether these are proprietary models, Anthropic or Cohere or ChatGPT, you need to go multi-model. And that need is only going to increase this year as we start to see more and more and more models that are multimodal, meaning everything from text to speech to vision. And so being able to enable that kind of multi-model future and that multimodal future was one really big bet that we got right. Bet number two was that enterprises really wanted to simplify. They wanted guardrails, but they also massively wanted to simplify the complexity of everything that they were doing. And that's what we really enable with our single API. And so that was number two that we got right and has really driven a lot of growth for us as a company. And then bet number three was that folks really wanted to enable their journey. And so kind of looking at everything through that lens was the third component.
What happened behind the scenes to be able to map out those bets in the way that you have?
Fully bluntly, a huge amount of argument, debate, pushing back and forth with our internal team, looking at all of the data coming from customers, from prospects, and then going one step above that and saying, what do we think the future of this is going to be? And why do we think that's the future? And then challenging each other until like 3, 4 a.m. on many, many nights until we got to something that we thought was cohesive and made sense.
How do you build a culture where that's the reality? Because I think a lot of companies talk about that and a lot of founders talk about that. And then I see inside and it's like complete bullshit. Like that never happens. So how do you make it real? How did you build a culture where things can be debated and worked through in that type of way?
It's a really good question. My first response is I really don't know the answer to that. That's a really, really poor answer, I have to say. And the reason why I'm like quickly thinking through that is because it's really, really hard to take cause away from effect and to figure out the differences between correlation and causation. There are a bunch of things that we do that I think are correlated to that, but it's really, really hard to prove out that causation. So creating an environment where people feel free to do that. That's something that everyone says. Obviously, that's correlated there. But really, if I were to look at it holistically, I think cultures, more than anything that you write down on a piece of paper, are made up of the people that you bring around the table, the people that you have inside of your walls, and how you're able to enable them. And ultimately, it then quickly becomes a function of having people on board that are better than you are, and then enabling them to succeed. And then beyond that, all of the like written documentation on building culture really serve as a way of being able to scale out what you accomplished in the first place. But ultimately, I don't think that any number of like PowerPoints or Notion docs have anything to do with that kind of initial je ne sais quoi.
So we're depressingly already, 1 week into February. So 2024 is flying by. I'm sure all of the annual planning is long done. When it comes to the 2024 plan, what would you say is like your number one burning priority and what's keeping you up at night as you think about the year ahead?
Yeah, that's a super good question. Really, it starts with customers. Customers are really thinking about productionizing everything that they're trying to do from a Gen AI effort perspective. And what keeps us up at night, as well as what we spend all of our time thinking about, is how can we help them do that securely? How can we make sure that our product roadmap, our sales, customer success, and so on and so forth teams are able to assist them with that and able to like ease their journey of productionizing all of their Gen AI investments?
As I mentioned there in the intro, you've raised over 38 million to date. What have you learned about fundraising throughout this journey?
A couple of good questions. One, who you raise from is enormously important in a way that is massively underappreciated, I think, when folks are in good times, but is massively important when folks are not. And that ultimately, it really just comes down to alignment with the folks on your cap table.
How do you check for alignment before you proceed with a deal?
There are a couple ways. One way is obviously talking to founders who have worked with that particular investor or individual that both had a good outcome, but also founders that didn't have a good outcome. Two is just kind of the proverbial deep discussion around what are they trying to accomplish? What are their values? What is the outcome that they're going for? How are they thinking about the company? How are they thinking about the future? And then just taking it from there.
Let's imagine I come to you and I say, Neil, I want to start a company. It's not a competitor, but it's going to sell into a similar space. What would be the number one piece of advice that you'd give me based on everything you've learned so far in bringing this technology to market?
Simplify everything that you're doing, from your ICP to the features in your product, to what you're trying to accomplish, to anything and everything in your organization, and keep stripping it down, and then strip it down further and further and further and further until someone's not willing to pay for what you're doing. And then add a little bit more value in there, and you probably just got it right.
Have you ever made something too simple?
I wish we had. We've certainly not had enough features or enough capabilities, but we've never been able to fully follow that single piece of advice, making me obviously a bit of a hypocrite here as I seek to offer it.
At least you're honest. An honest hypocrite. We'll take it. Final question for you. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision here?
Enable everyone to leverage foundation models, internal, external models, and do so in a simple and secure way.
Amazing. I love the vision, and I've really loved this conversation. It's been a lot of fun. Before we wrap up here, if there's any founders that are listening in that want to follow along with your journey, where should they go?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. Calypso AI, Neil Serebryany.
Awesome. Neil, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been a lot of fun.
Cool. Thanks, Brett.
Keep in touch.
Look forward to it.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.